Good morning, everybody. My name is Suzanne Goyok. I work for Conservation International as the Senior Vice President for the Africa Field Division. I will be your host tonight. So we will be facilitating this panel today, and I'm going to give you a little bit of ground rules. I've been asked here by the Régie to make sure that phones are on silent, and that when you're using your mic, that it is a question or for the panelists, you hold them like this. Otherwise, you will not be heard. There's a lot of noise around, so we will try to follow those instructions so that everybody can follow the panel. So today we have the honor of having a very distinguished panel, and I will actually introduce them not by order of importance, but as they are seated. We want to link what we have been committing at COP26 and engagement on nature and knowing how we will be able to finance nature in order to be able to reach the zero net emission objective of 2050. In Paris, we have made huge commitments all together, private sector, governments, civil society, activists, people, cities, agricultural sector, all of us came together just to say we will achieve this by 2050. The one thing we did not take into account is the fact that nature was not a given. We did not take into account the fact that we will continue to degrade nature, and that if we were not investing in protecting it and making sure that it was whole and making biodiversity at the top of our agenda at the same time that we were addressing climate, we would not be able to achieve those targets by 2050. Today, with us, we have just here, Kim Reyes, working for National Geographic as an explorer, a writer, an activist, an advisor, and the co-founder and advisor of the Center for Sustainability in the Philippines. Sitting just right on the right, you have the Right Honorable Minister Terence Kofi, who is the Secretary of State for Food. Sorry. That is bad. Yes. For Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom. Just next to her, we have Cassie Flynn, Head of Climate Promise, much shorter and easier at the UNDP. And last but not least, the only gentleman of this panel, the Honorable Minister Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Canada. Without further ado, I will invite the Right Honorable Minister to come and give the keynote address.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, for that warm welcome. And can I extend a warm welcome today to the United Kingdom Pavilion, not only to our distinguished panel, but to those of you who are clearly very interested in what we're doing about that collectively we want to achieve through nature-based solutions. So this session on the role that nature can and must play is absolutely a key part of our plans to meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement. We've got an inspiring set of leaders with us. It's certainly been a privilege to will be a privilege to hear from Indigenous peoples at this conference, local communities, voices on the front line, and indeed from the next generation throughout COP27. So alongside the science and innovation that can help us achieve the greatest possible impact, we know that our efforts to help the natural world recover will only succeed if we work with all those communities. And that's exactly what we need to do and want to do, because we are in the midst of our greatest challenge for climate and biodiversity. Now, meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement is absolutely critical to helping nature recover, as we know it can, including our ever warmer, more acidic ocean. We desperately need to make urgent, deep cuts to emissions across all sectors. We know that any credible pathway to reaching the Paris goals must involve protecting and restoring the natural world, drawing on all sources of investment to do it. In the United Kingdom, our aim is to raise at least £500 million of private finance to help nature recover and improve, and to achieve that every year by 2027, rising to more than £1 billion a year by 2030. And that's why today I'm absolutely delighted to be announcing a new £30 million investment into our UK Big Nature Impact Fund. That's designed to bring together public and private finance, working in partnership with Federated Hermes and Finance Earth, to invest in a pipeline of high-integrity nature projects that will help the market reflect the true value of a safe, healthy environment. It should help us plant new woodland, restore precious peatland, and create new habitats, as well as bringing green jobs to communities across our country. And of course, the UK will continue to work in partnership with nature-rich countries, as we have done so for decades, and throughout our COP26 presidency as well. I was really thrilled when last year in Glasgow we brought nature into the heart of our response to climate change at COP26. We brought it in for good, from our shared ocean to the world's most important forests. And I'm delighted that the UK is investing at least £40 million of climate finance to establish a global centre on biodiversity and climate. That will help us draw together expertise from not just across the UK, but from around the world, and it will help us rapidly scale up the important investment we need to make. We're all converts, I think, nature-based solutions. We know they are effective, and we know they are a cost-effective solution multiplier. And our aim is to support the efforts of developing countries to value, protect and restore nature, and to use natural resources more sustainably, so we can take on the causes and the impacts of climate change and the decline of nature. And we want to make sure that we help the world's poorest and most vulnerable people in doing that. That's why I'm proud that we'll be doing even more through our newly established £100 million Biodiverse Landscapes Fund, where we will cover from rainforests of Latin America to the Western Congo Basin, to the savannas and wetlands of Southern Africa, and the mountains and rivers of the lower Mekong. And all of this is possible because, having committed to doubling UK international climate finance to £11.6 billion, we are tripling our funding on adaptation to £1.5 billion by 2025. And I'm particularly pleased we're committed to spending at least £3 billion on nature and nature-based solutions, and to spending half of that on forests, including our disappearing blue forests, the magical mangroves. It's great to see Nigel and Dr. Mahmood working with the Global Mangrove Alliance, and the UK is endorsing the new mangrove breakthrough, which is aiming to protect and restore 15 million hectares of mangroves globally by 2030. I was in this role, was in a role in DEFRA a few years ago in the UK government, where I was a junior minister, the Minister for the Environment, for 3 years, and I saw myself when I went to Mozambique the difference that mangroves make to the lives and livelihoods of millions of people there, as they do, we already know, for billions of people around the world. So I'm really proud that we will already helping coastal communities around the world to make the most of these benefits as well, through our newly established £500 million Blue Planet Fund. This morning, at an event hosted by Stephen in the Canada Pavilion, I was delighted to say the UK is investing an additional £12 million into the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, building on the £2 million investment we made last year. And continuing to work alongside our friends from Canada, we'll bring together insurers, banks, governments, academia and civil society to mobilise investment in solutions that will make marine biodiversity and vulnerable coastal communities more resilient. Particularly in such testing times, it's really encouraging to see the commitments that so many countries that you made at COP26 coming to life and inspiring others as well. We'll be hearing more about that in a moment. And just yesterday, at Cassie's event, the UNDP Climate Promise Programme, we said that we would add a further £6 million, building on the £3 million contribution we'd already provided in the last year. And again, that will help developing countries consider how nature can help them both to meet their climate commitments and also to make sure that they are as ambitious as possible. These words get used considerably, of course. It's a shared global challenge that we have together. And we'll only be able to make it work if we work together. pulling every lever we can, accelerating the systemic change we need at scale on everything from food to finance. Now, that vital work has guided our presidency of COP26. We're delighted and want it to continue here at this COP and indeed into the COPs to come. And in particular, it must help us make the CBD COP15 in Montreal the Paris moment our world needs. That's to put the world on the natural world on a road to recovery this decade. Because, ladies and gentlemen, friends, there is still a gigantic gap between where we stand today and where we need to be. But if we work together to close it, we can avoid the worst impacts, we can improve the lives of people around the world, not just now, but for generations to come. And I'm thrilled the UK is committed to playing our part and continuing to work with all of you to see this through. So thank you very much for coming here today, and I'm really looking forward and excited to be part of the panel that we're about to have expertly chaired. Thank you very much.
I will ask the panelists, please, to come and join us. KM, Right Honourable Minister, Kathy, Honourable Minister. No, that's fine. So we have to thank the UK for their leadership at the COP26 of nature, and to congratulate the government of the United Kingdom and Canada for signing up to the 10 plans for financing nature. But as we are moving from COP26, arriving at COP27 and going to CBD COP15, we would like to know and understand a little bit better, how is it going to work? How is it that we are going to mobilize and attract others to be able to close that financing gap? 700 million is an enormous amount. We can expect it to come only from governments, even though we would like to. But I think that governments are the catalyst and the people that can enable a process that will bring the other stakeholders to the table in order to be able to address those challenges. So, when you think and listen to what the Right Honourable Minister has just been saying, I would like to hear how Canada, who is going to be the co-host of the COP15, has been addressing and thinking about how we will position ourselves to be able to address those challenges and make sure that nature and the protection of biodiversity and financings are at the top of the agenda.
Testing, okay, working, thank you. Therese, thank you so much for welcoming me here at the UK Pavilion. And really, I don't think we can say it enough how the UK, under the UK leadership, we've been able to, at COP26, to break the silos between ocean, climate, and nature. And I think there's so much discussion here about nature at a climate COP, and so much discussion about COP15 at a climate COP, which speaks to the fact that we are in the process of breaking those silos more and more. Now, obviously, they're still largely being treated in separate UN convention, but that doesn't mean that they can't be interaction. For example, Canada last year, as part of our $5.3 billion climate finance commitment, we announced that we were going to dedicate 20% of it to nature-based solutions. And we're encouraging more countries to do that, so that we are working at the same time on climate change and nature-based solutions. We're doing the same back at home. In the last 5 years, we've committed $5 billion to nature and conservation in Canada, which would record level investment. But Canada has an important role to play, obviously, both domestically and internationally, as the fourth boreal forest in the world, one of the largest wetland systems in the world. So we have to work both domestically and internationally. How do we do that? Well, I think COP15, and I totally agree with you, Therese, I think COP15 needs to be our Paris biodiversity moment, where we set the stage for what countries will need to do, not just between now and 2030, but beyond 2030. And I think we can do that. And if we do that, if we have ambitious goal protecting, conserving at least 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030 and working to halting and reversing biodiversity loss, then it will set the stage for both countries, the private sector, philanthropies, and multilateral institutions to see that the goals are there. We will be working in ensuring that we have the right mechanisms in place to do that, so that we can mobilize the funds that are needed. I think when we think about mobilizing funds, we also need to look at subsidies. And I think if I can make a parallel to the climate change debate and fossil fuel subsidies, we evaluate that there's about $700 billion every year of subsidies that go to development of fossil fuels. Now, obviously, this has to stop. And we can repurpose this money to invest in climate change measures, in clean technologies, in renewable energy, in transit, in electrification. And that's exactly what we've been doing in Canada. If we look at our export credit agency, in 2019, it invested about $12 billion a year in fossil fuel projects. This has gone down to $4 billion. If you ask me, $4 billion is still too much. But we've made a commitment that we will eliminate all those subsidies by 2023, 2 years earlier than the 2025 G20 commitment. So by next year, Canada will have no more subsidies to encourage the production of fossil fuels domestically or internationally. What specifically what that agency has done is they've increased their funding for clean tech and renewable energy project by 75%. So we've basically taken money going to fossil fuels and we've repurposed it for clean energy projects. We need to do the same in the agricultural sector around the world. There's about, depending on who you ask, but around $500 billion of harmful agricultural subsidies that are contributing to the degradation of nature. Let's eliminate those and repurpose them. And we're doing it with fossil fuels. We can do it as well. And sometimes people say, well, you know, there's issues in terms of how will those communities where these projects are happening be affected. We can do a just transition on agricultural subsidies as we're doing a just transition on fossil fuel subsidies and on communities that are being impacted. I mean, the UK has almost eliminated coal-fired electricity from your electricity mix, and you've done that through a just transition. We're doing that in Canada as well. We've committed to eliminate coal-fired electricity in the country by 2030, working with communities and workers that are being impacted by those transformations. So we can do it on the climate side, and we need to do it on the biodiversity side as well.
Thank you very much. I think we can give him a clap. Right Honourable, if I can call you Right Honourable. I think you've said a little bit in your keynote address about and talked about how the UK has been taking action internally in the country, but also internationally. If you could expand a little bit more on the actions and measures that the UK government is taking to protect nature and restore nature.
Well, during our presidency, we passed the Environment Act as well, which set us very challenging, legally binding targets. Probably the primary one to be to halt and reverse the decline in biodiversity. So that's everything else in effect underpins that. At the same time, we'd also updated our Climate Change Act just a couple of years ago to be net zero by 2050. And indeed, the carbon budgets is the mechanism that we do to achieve that. So more broadly, we set up a £750 million Nature for Climate Fund. So this is about repurposing what we can do internally. And we're right in the process of, in effect, redesigning the subsidies that used to go to the farmers and landowners from the EU through the Common Agricultural Policy into public money for public good. And that will be repurposing that money towards environmental improvements. So that we're still in the middle of that process now. But I think it's important, one of the elements of the 10-point plan for biodiversity, which we're promoting, biodiversity finance, we're promoting ahead of CBD 15, is about bringing private sector money in as well. And that's why the announcement today, dare I say it, climate things, if it ain't $1 billion, does it even get a headline? I mean, I got a great round of applause just for the £6 million last night, which was great. But putting that £30 million today into seed investment to bring in private finance, I think is a critical step. And these are early steps for us in how we leverage private investment into nature. It's a different thing where the carbon stuff is already well established. But I think it's that changing of certain aspects of land use while still wanting to have food security in our country, but recognizing there are certainly ways we can do things better. So whether it's about promoting a salt marsh, whether it's about creating habitat, we're putting our money where our mouth is and repurposing some of the existing subsidies that are happening today in a just way.
Thank you very much. Cassie, I will come over to you. It is very understandable and visible that northern countries have been able to have the policy framework and the enabling environment in order to be putting the right measures and policies in order to achieve their climate goals and nature restorative goals. But the UNDP has a mandate in that, and we know that a lot of developing countries don't have the same capacities, financial capacities and incentive mechanisms that they can put in place eternally. How does the UNDP intend to support developing countries to achieve their restorative goals?
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you to all of the panelists for the remarks. It's I couldn't really echo what you said, Excellency Coffey, in the beginning about how the Paris Agreement and work on biodiversity, land, and nature are intertwined. The fates of these global agreements, the fates of our ability to protect the planet and ourselves are intertwined. And so that leaves a series of questions for ourselves about the mechanisms out of the Paris Agreement, the mechanisms out of CBD, how these fit together. And the good news is that we're not starting from scratch. And certainly within UNDP, we have a program called the Climate Promise, where we support 127 developing countries with their nationally determined contributions, as pledges under the Paris Agreement. And what's really interesting about this, and this is about 85% of developing countries have received support through the Climate Promise, is that 90% of these NDCs are including nature, land, and forests. It is in nearly every single one. And this is an opportunity, because what we can do is start to leverage what we have. And so we know, at UNDP we have a $400 million program on REDD+, including REDD+ results-based payments from the Green Climate Fund in places like Brazil and Indonesia, Ecuador, Ghana. We have BioFin, a biodiversity finance initiative. We have NBSAPs. There are ways that these tools can really start to come together. And I think this is where, looking at the legacy also of COP26, putting in place this Climate Leaders Forest Declaration, the partnership that is now supporting that, this is critical. And yes, Excellency, you got a big round of applause for the support from the UK to scale up this work, because I think countries are increasingly seeing that you can't address climate without addressing biodiversity, nature, and forests. And being able to have the finance to do that, being able to have the technical support to do that, is our challenge going forward. How do we implement? This is the implementation COP, right? How do we make this happen for developing countries in an equitable, efficient, and just way?
Thank you very much. Justice, justice, justice. And I think that we've been talking about action now, and it would be very good to talk about our ambitions. How do we position ourselves? How is it that you would see, as a conservationist, not somebody in government, not somebody in charge of intergovernmental responsibilities, how do you see, as a conservationist, that we can actually better integrate the ambition to conserve nature from COP on climate, to COP on biodiversity. Over to you, Kiam.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm KM from the Philippines. Really happy to be here, and thank you to my co-panelists. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge place. Egypt, from the pyramids to the Red Sea, is a country of unparalleled historical importance and spectacular natural wonder. But now, not now or ever, will we overcome our dual climate and biodiversity crises without human rights. I stand with British Egyptian Alaa Abdel Fattah, Mohammed Oxygen Ibrahim, Hoda Abdel Moniem, Hisham Fouad, Ziad El Alaimi, and all political prisoners here and across the global south who fight so I may have the freedom to be on this platform in this panel today. With regards to integrating the climate and biodiversity agenda, I preface this by saying what has finally reached popular dialogue, which is fantastic. Integration will only happen with Indigenous peoples and local and frontline communities because we are the groundswell that will deliver both climate and biodiversity goals in real life, not just in policy, but on the ground. I've seen so many exciting pledges. Today, we outlined many of them from the international community, recognizing and being made directly to Indigenous peoples and local communities over the last 12 to 18 months. The momentum is wonderful, exciting, and it gives me so much hope. But as a frontline conservationist from a small IPLC-led organization, I actually don't know where to access these pledges. This global finance that I'm being told will be directly funneled to groups like mine. With this in mind, for me, the #1 opportunity that I see for a more integrated agenda is actually a pretty straightforward ask. If you're a donor, whether from the private or public sector, and you pledge an amount of direct funding, whether it's $100,000 or $100 million to IPLCs, then publish on your website how we access it. Because I tell you, we really don't need that much. In the Philippines, my small frontline group legally protected a swath of pristine rainforest alive with birdsong, rivers, and birds like you will never see. Now known as the Cleopatra's Needle Critical Habitat, which is nearly 2.5 times the size of Sharm el-Sheikh, storing up to 8.3 million tons of carbon at a total project cost of 140,000 British pounds. This is less than 5 delegates staying at the Four Seasons Resort for COP27. Again, I'll also cite what we've already heard times over. Indigenous peoples and make up 5% of global population, yet protect 80% of global biodiversity. Imagine how much more we can restore with funding. In fact, the research shows that we achieve the same outcomes for climate and biodiversity on less than 1/4 of the spending of global institutions. So again, quick recap on what's needed to integrate the climate and biodiversity agenda. 1, if you make a pledge to directly fund IPLCs, please publish on your website how to access it. Do we have to apply for a grant through another INGO or maybe DEFRA or one of the aid agencies from one of the governments? Please make this transparent. It sows mistrust between IPLCs and the international community. In another panel this week, I heard an IP leader refer to the international donor community as middlemen or matryoshka dolls, but I know that we are all here in this room. We are more than this. So making transparent how pledges will be dispersed and can be accessed will ensure the climate and biodiversity agenda is better integrated on the ground. Number 2, another suggestion is creating a centralized website for all grants globally that are really open for direct application from IPLCs. For example, the Path to Scale group has made a great start on this. I've been asking around if you know others. Let's link them up and strengthen the work. And number 3, final opportunity, I want to highlight that country delegations across the 2 conventions, I feel, you mentioned some other things earlier that were very interesting, are actually not talking to each other. In my personal opinion, or in my personal experience, firstly, this is an excellent opportunity for governments across the 3 Rio conventions to talk. But I've seen firsthand these last 2 weeks that the UNFCCC delegations don't actually know what's happening in the UN CBD negotiations and vice versa. So I think that this is the 3 steps that I hope we can think about and take away with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give it a clap. Thank you, Kim, for the acknowledgement of our colleagues that have put their names and lives on the front line for us to be here today. But I think I was going to ask you a question, Kessie, but I'm going to twist it a little bit. Kim had a very specific question about indigenous people and local communities, so I don't think we can leave it completely unaddressed. And it is very linked to the mandate that the UNDP has. It is true, all of us here around this room have difficulties to understand how we do understand those pledges. The pledges are being made by governments and funneled through international organizations for different stakeholder groups to be able to access. How transparent, how easy, if you're in experience, what have you done as an organization and within your own department to make it easier for users to be able to access those funds, please?
Thank you. And this is a key question, because when we talk about being able to meet the challenge with climate and nature, we cannot do it without the leadership of local communities and indigenous populations. It just is not going to happen. And so something that we've been paying a lot of attention to at UNDP, and this is about 1/3 of our portfolio, is dedicated to payment for environmental services that channel funds toward local communities and indigenous peoples and forest communities. And this is something that has been really central to this work, because involving local communities and indigenous peoples from the beginning. How do you design work in a way that is supportive of forest communities, of indigenous populations, of local communities? And so it's not just it's not just a handout, it's a co-collaboration. It is designing it together, it is implementing it together, it is being proud of it together. And what you're saying is really important about transparency and about being able to know where the funding is going, how you can access it, what are the opportunities that are available. And I would add to this as well, the burden of accessing funds is something that is, can be quite problematic. Because if you don't have, for example, financial standing within a certain regulatory framework, you have to go through a different body. It becomes a very sort of regulatory and financial labyrinth often. And so something that we have tried to do is create guidebooks, to have consultations, to have workshops, to be able to meet this need and to be able to have sort of practical steps forward for communities that need this funding now. They can't wait 3 years, they can't wait 5 years. And it's something that is really at the heart of what we are doing. We are trying to scale it up massively, and certainly involving communities from the beginning is the way we are really going. So.
Thank you very much, Kessie. Honourable Minister, please add to this.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your comments. As many of you know, Canada has a very dark history when it comes to our relationship with Indigenous people through decades of exploitation and cultural assimilation, or at least attempted cultural assimilation. And over the last 7 years, we've been trying really hard to change the nature of that relationship, and that's true especially in when it comes to conservation. So we've launched a number of different initiatives on the path towards reconciliation with Indigenous people. For example, we now have this program in Canada called the Indigenous-led Conservation IPC, Indigenous Protected and Conservation Areas, which are projects that are Indigenous-led for conservation. It can be an Indigenous conservation area. It can be a national park. There's various projects, and it really comes from the ground up. It's not us, the federal government, telling them, as we used to do, what we think should happen. It's an extremely, in fact, in Canada now, you can't plan a conservation project if Indigenous people aren't at the table from the beginning. We've made a commitment to create 15 new national parks, because we realized during COVID that in our big cities, the only place people could go were parks in cities, but we don't have enough of them. I live in front of a fairly large park in Montreal, and during COVID there was more people at that park than at a hockey game of our team, the Montreal team, which is the most lucrative team of all the North American Hockey League. So very popular, don't have enough of them. For all of the new urban parks that we are going to create, Indigenous people have to be part of it. The local Indigenous communities have to work with us. We've also launched a program called the Indigenous Guardian Program, where we're basically funding Indigenous people to do what they've been doing for generations. And it's a program where they tell us what they would like to do in their community. Some communities will work on poaching, some others will do environmental monitoring, some will do conservation, some will do traditional gatherings and harvesting. So it's a very diverse type of program, and it's very unusual for a government not to tell people what to do, but be told what we should be supporting. And we're trying to translate that into our international efforts on conservation as well.
Thank you very much. It is paramount to understand and to put at the middle of everything we do the fact that people are the reason why. They are the ones suffering to be able to gather what they need for their livelihoods. We all are in agreement when we say that we identify the ecosystem services that nature provides to people, to cities, to environments. You know, the example you just gave on the park and the fact that the park was a central part of what happened in COVID is not something that we used to see before. It was something we were crossing through, a dog that we were passing by. So those are the kind of things we want to see. But I would like to bring us back to, we're going to COP very soon. Indigenous people and local communities have expectations. Government have expectations. That they are from the north, the south, we are all in there. When there is a tornado somewhere, we're all feeling it. When people are starving somewhere, we're all feeling it. The impact of climate change is being felt in a very equal manner all around the globe, and that you are rich, poor, white, black, yellow, orange, has no relevance into the way that it is affecting you. So leading to COP15, Right Honorable Minister, I will ask you, for you, what would be the key priorities that needs to be addressed at CBD COP15?
Thank you. And just briefly, if I may, Suzanne, one of the things, the projects that we do in different parts of the world is the Darwin Initiative. And I think a lot of this is on our website. But as Cassie pointed out, it's there are some, at times it feels very big barriers to getting there. But if in doubt, I always refer groups to go to our ambassador or high commissioner in their countries, because they are the fount of all knowledge and certainly the conduit into the rest of our government. But it's commendable to hear what you said about what you had done in your local community. Just building up.
And I think that maybe in terms of the grant process, it could be a bit easier. It's very long. And I've tried to do it with our communities in the past, but it has been very hard to, yeah. So maybe
well, that's useful feedback. Yeah. That's useful feedback on how we can perhaps try and improve that. But I'm conscious it's UK taxpayers' money, and we are careful about how we share that around the world. But building on that, in running up to Montreal and where we were 4 years ago here in Charm at CBD 14, trying to build on that. I think I'm very clear it is about the halting and, in fact, reversing the decline in biodiversity is our #1 goal. There are some really clear pathways we can achieve that, get that 30 by 30 on land and ocean, so we get that restoration going. That doesn't mean that you ignore the rest of the 70% of the world's lands or oceans either. But having that very clear focus, I think, will drive a lot of change. And candidly, making sure, of course, every country around the world uses resources, but we have to use them sustainably and genuinely sustainably, and rely on the innovation that we can bring. I was talking a bit yesterday about how we're taking legislation through Parliament on something called precision breeding, genetic technology, and this will help us develop products that will help us have climate resilient wheat or other things less resistant to pests, so we can reduce pesticides. So it's about leveraging that, And the key thing that we have set out a template working with other countries is the 10-point plan on biodiversity financing, and we need to make that as straightforward and natural as possible, just as the climate finance has become for tackling climate change. So it's about normalizing a lot of this, but also making sure our ambitions are real. If we think back about how nature is fundamental to the achievement of all the SDGs. You can't do it without improving and recovering nature. So it's that united element that we need. And at times, Suzanne is trying to persuade people that actually that very irritating wasp, which is a real pain in the neck, is actually doing a great job in killing off other things as well. So it's about making sure people appreciate nature in all its formats, even if at times it's a thing that you don't want resting on your shoulder. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the same question but with a twist to the Honourable Minister of Canada. How you are the co-host of this COP. So while putting yourself with the most ambitious targets ever, what would success would look like? Sorry, I've got a fly attacking me. She just said so. Biodiversity is attacking me. I must be doing a good job. So what would success look like for COP15 as the co-host of that CBD COP?
I agree with what Therese said. I think 30 by 30, halt and reversing. Now, obviously, mobilizing resources to help developing countries achieve those targets is also key. We can't just be talking about conservation and protection without talking about the fact that we need to mobilize resources, which is why the 10-point plan is so important. We have about 30-some countries that have signed on to it. We have 3 weeks before Montreal. Let's work together to see if we can't bring this to 60 countries or maybe even more that are signing on to this vision. Because I think this can be one of the landing zone of Montreal. If we can agree on 30 by 30, we will need to agree on how we mobilize resource to do that. I think through the work of the Maldives, Ecuador, the UK, and Gabon, I think we have the outline of what the agreement for resource mobilization looks like in Montreal. So we have 3 weeks, 5 in total if you count the COP. But let's make this a reality. I think if we have those two important pillars, there are obviously a number of other elements under negotiations, but I think these are two of the most important ones.
Amy? Yes. So before I go to KM, I would like to go back to you, Cassie. I did not ask you my question before, so I would like to go back to it. We're talking about ambition and how we're projecting ourselves for COP15. KM said something very interesting, saying that the head doesn't speak to the tail doesn't speak to the head, and that the different UN agencies don't talk to each other even though they are co-sharing the responsibility of the implementation of those mandates. Do you know how we will do better? Sure that living here and going to COP15, the different elements of the UNs that we cannot always comprehend come together to make sure that we have a successful COP?
I think there are a few pieces to this. The first is we have to make sure that these conventions are talking to each other at the sort of big picture dialogue level, but also with the concrete outcomes of these processes. They have to align, and ideally, what comes out of here at COP27 feeds directly into what you're going to see in Montreal and gives momentum to it. And I think here for the United Nations system, this is where we have an opportunity, this is where we have a responsibility to be bringing all of these actors together. Because quite frankly, we need all of the expertise around the table. And the UN system is big. Sometimes I call it a big rainforest because you have so much going on at so many different ways and different organizations that are pulling sometimes with each other, sometimes quite frankly not with each other. But what's important is that we are serving the countries and that we're able to be responsive to what the countries need. Because and to the point earlier, sometimes these processes can be so overwhelming. you know, for local communities, for people that may see climate change in the news or see the biodiversity and nature crisis in the news and be a bit nervous about it, be scared, but not know what COP27 is or not know what the CBD COP is, and how they can engage in it is so critically important. And I think this is our collective responsibility here, is to be able to tell this story, tell this narrative, be able to show the opportunities that are available between support from the UK, from Canada, the leadership of Indigenous peoples and local communities and forest communities, to be able to push us all in this same direction. And certainly at the UN, we want to do what we can. UNDP works very closely with UNFCCC, works very closely with UNEP and the CBD Secretariat to be able to start to align these. We have a long way to go, but the commitment is there, and we're trying to move as fast as we can.
Thank you very much. I'll jump directly to you. I won't even stand. You are on the front line, you're living it. We felt the passion, we heard the passion. What do we need to do in the next 5 weeks to make sure that COP is a success? What is it? Who is it that we need to engage? What we need to do more of, what we need to do less of to make sure that COP15 is a success and that we have pinpointed the key actions and key commitments that we need in order to address nature and climate together?
I think that I'm going to give a very obvious response considering my position, and that is going to be that we need to be in direct consultation with our Indigenous peoples and local communities very closely over the next 3 weeks. And I say this because above all, for me, what a successful COP15 is a COP15 that recognizes the free and prior informed consent in Target 3 and across the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So again, I've prepared a little talk here to make sure I don't miss anything, but I'm actually part of the 30 by 30, or our organization is leading the 30 by 30 Southeast Asia Coalition, urging our ASEAN member states to join the 30 by 30, which is also co-chaired by the UK and Canada. I'm very excited to announce that the Philippines did actually join last month the High Ambition Coalition, which is very, very exciting, yep, as a result of many efforts. Oh my gosh. And I obviously talked, and we've talked here about the financing, items that need to be addressed. But definitely for me as a frontline conservationist, the single most important ask from COP15 is that we secure free and prior informed consent in any area-based conservation targets that are established at the international and later the national level. And I say this with direct experience. We're very fortunate in the Philippines that we actually have the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, and our Indigenous rights are enshrined. But we actually also underwent a 2-year legal process, mobilizing government staff up to the forests of Cleopatra's Needle, riding off-road and making countless high river crossings to reach the disappearing Batak tribe of Cleopatra's Needle, where there are only 200 people left to facilitate this process. And there's a lot of talk about FPIC, but if you'll entertain me, I want to remind us briefly what each element of FPIC actually means. Free means that the consent is self-directed at community timelines. All of us understand the urgency, but if there's no community urgency, then none of it matters. Prior means that consent is sought in advance and communities are involved in conceptualization, and I was so excited to hear some of the things that you were talking about IPLCs in your respective areas of engagement being really involved in that conceptualization process. Informed means that consent is given from information being provided in a way that is culturally appropriate, including location, language, and presentation formats, videos, graphics, storytelling. And consent is real when it's a collective decision made in accordance with community customs, traditions, and timelines. And lastly, consultation is not consent, which I also learned the hard way. Originally, we actually dreamt of protecting a swath of forest at Cleopatra's Needle, much bigger than the critical habitat that we have now. It included an Indigenous community called Kayasan. The community is nestled in the forests of Cleopatra's Needle, and it boasts views over the neighboring UNESCO World Heritage Site, Puerto Princesa Underground River National Park. Except that as inexperienced as we were, we didn't take the time to make allies in the community who trusted us. We didn't communicate effectively our intentions. And we didn't spend enough time on the ground just listening. Till finally, not wanting to waste their time nor ours, they wrote us an official letter withdrawing their interest in our project. It was heartbreak. It was the ultimate breakup letter, worse than anything I've ever gotten from a boyfriend, for example. We worked to serve our community, but that day we didn't. Rather, we got taught. And so what we learned from this is that we must respect the very human need innate to all of us to simply be listened to. If we want to overcome this biodiversity and climate crisis, then we must listen to what their hearts and minds of these frontline communities actually have to say. And so we cannot sit here and say that we were all about high ambition but not uphold basic human rights. And finally, I just want to say very quickly that a high ambition COP15 will include heads of state. At the moment, we don't have that commitment from our heads of state, and we're about to enter possibly the 6th mass extinction. We do need our heads of state there to provide leadership and guidance. I urge all of you to speak to your heads of state and tweet them. And finally, we do need experienced and efficient facilitators to lead negotiations at COP15. I've been in the negotiations very involved as part of the Philippine delegation and a lobbying group outside. And I think that there is also room for improvement there. I really, I'm so excited for China and Canada to be co-hosts. And I do hope that you bring your best negotiators and your best diplomats, because this is really something for all of us globally.
What do you say after that? No, I think that I'm going to ask the audience. We are out of time, but if there is the one burning question, and I'm scanning the audience now. He was the fastest one, so he gets the burning question before we close this panel, and thanks our participants.
Thank you, and thanks to all the speakers. I'm James Royston from World Animal Protection. I agree with a lot of the comments made, and in particular, I want to thank the speakers for talking about the priority being protecting forests and protecting habitats rather than trying to restore them, which is a lot harder and takes a lot longer. I'd be keen to know, particularly from the ministers from the UK and Canada, what you're doing regarding industrial farming and the effect that is having on deforestation, particularly the demand for animal feed, as well as the wildlife trade, both of which are leading causes of biodiversity loss and which need addressing if we really are to halt biodiversity decline. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I will take only the one question, but I will give the opportunity to the Right Honourable Minister and the Honourable Minister to answer. Please, Madam.
Well, in terms of in the UK, we are, or certainly England, because it's a devolved matter, so we have the Welsh Government, Scottish Government and Northern Ireland Government who will be developing aspects of their own programmes. We are shifting agricultural subsidy from the traditional EU approach to an environmental land management scheme. So we will see public money for public good, and the same amount of money will still be available in that regard. In terms of the broader international elements, we continue to invest in protecting but also restoring biodiversity. Dare I say it, mangroves are magical, but they take quite a long time to get to that magic, the full magic. So protecting what we have today as well as planting more for the future is critical. And in terms of illegal wildlife trade, the CITES conference has just started this week in Panama. Unfortunately, I cannot be here in two places at once, but it's very important to me that's a big mission when I was in the ministry before. And in terms of bringing the world together, it's not just about, dare I say it, certain kinds of species which are iconic, but they can mobilize people, and indeed their role in zoonotic diseases has become very apparent. So I'm very keen that we focus a lot on the flora of illegal wildlife trade as well as the fauna, and I'll continue to make appropriate push and shove around the world in achieving that as well. Because without that flora, the fauna won't exist in those parts of the world either. So that's why we all love the big beasts, the elephants, the rhinos, even the cute pangolins, but it's critical that we protect the rosewood and all the other different aspects of flora too as well.
Thank you for the question. We are in Canada in the process of reviewing our agricultural practices, both from a climate, from a land use, and also looking very closely at reforming our entire pesticides regime right now, which is frankly outdated in Canada and needs some work. And during the last election campaign in 2021, we made a commitment to review that. And so the Minister of Health and myself and the Minister of Agriculture in Canada are working on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you, the audience, for putting up with us and with me, your moderator, for the last hour. I would like to thank the panelists. KM, thank you very much. Right Honourable Minister, it was a pleasure. Cassie and Honourable Minister, thank you very much. Please give them the last round of applause. Give me one. And until next time, thank you very much, and we see each other in CBD COP.